Well, Terri Butler, you're a veteran of one by-election. This is your first general election. Just compare and contrast. This would be noticeably tougher now, wouldn't it?
Oh, I don't know if it's tougher, actually. It's interesting being in a general election, but, you know, for me, the by-election was about 2 months between getting pre-selected and having an election. So in some ways, this is pretty similar with an 8-week campaign.
Now, you achieved 38% of the primary vote last time. It's not going to be as high as that this time, is it? If you factor in the public disengagement and the active search that we know is going on for non-major parties.
I don't know, Greg. It's a really interesting question. Of course, in the by-election, I was up against a great candidate in Bill Glasson. He was fantastic, local for 40 years, really well known. In this election, I'm up against a woman who's from Logan, who doesn't seem to know anyone in the electorate. The Liberal Party haven't put up such a stellar candidate as they did last time. So I'm not sure how that'll impact on the primary vote.
But if preferences...
and I'm also not sure how...
Sorry, if preferences are important, isn't the field here, as I look over it, a little more right-leaning or conservative? So you couldn't actually bank, apart from the Greens perhaps, on many of those preferences necessarily flowing back towards you?
I don't know. We had a pretty diverse field in the by-election. We had the Pirate Party, we had the secular humanists. This time round, we've got the Liberal Democrats who in some ways are really similar to the Pirate Party. So I think it's the great thing about this, of course, is that it's a mystery until the election day, but on Saturday night it'll all become clear to us. I think the speculation can be a bit difficult sometimes, so I don't really envy your job.
Yes, and we do pick up plenty of it. Along the way in recent weeks, Queensland ALP types have been indicating a high level of nervousness about the seat of Griffith. Did they match that with extra resources, particularly in, say, the last 2 or 3 weeks?
Oh, look, I think it's fair to say that we have always been concerned about Griffith. I mean, I'm on 1.76%. It's not a safe seat. It's a very marginal seat. My electorate is, compared to other Labor electorates, fairly wealthy in terms of both property prices and incomes here. So it's a different sort of seat to some of the Labor seats in Victoria and New South Wales. Of course, it was always going to be a challenge for us. But I have to say, the feeling's been really positive. Yes, absolutely, we've been putting a lot of focus and attention on the electorate of Griffith. The Liberal Party haven't been, so we'll see how that plays out on election night.
As you say, there is a degree of affluence within the electorate. Where does that intersect with some of the big national campaign themes by Labor and Bill Shorten? What, for instance, is the Medicare bulk billing rate there, and why would Medicare bite as an issue in your electorate?
Well, it's interesting that you ask because, of course, the $2 billion in cuts to Medicare funding that's currently in the federal budget won't just affect people who are bulk billed, it'll affect people who are used to paying a fee at the doctor because, of course, their fees will go up too. So I think people are concerned about primary health care. They're concerned about that, the increase to the price of medicine, the changes to pathology, which could mean $100 for a mammogram or $1,000 for a melanoma scan. Absolutely, they're worried about that. Interestingly, there's been, I think, quite a positive reaction to our policies in relation to housing affordability because though there's a lot of people in my electorate who do have investment properties, there's also a lot of people in my electorate who've got kids in their 30s in very well-paid jobs who can't afford to save for a deposit.
And so you think that the balance of opinion tips more towards the latter group, does it? Those who are worried about their children rather than those who may seek in the future to get yet more investment properties.
I've had, just the other night I was talking to a Liberal voter who said to me, I've voted Liberal all my life, but I believe something has to be done about negative gearing and I'm voting Labor for the first time. And I've certainly spoken to men and women in their 50s and 60s who've got kids who are in the sort of 20s and 30s bracket who are finding it really hard, even with really good jobs, to save the money that they need for a deposit to buy a house. And I think, you know, no matter what your politics, everybody would agree that it's not really ideal to have middle class young adults with families not being able to get into the housing market. I mean, it's just terrible. And so that's been quite a strong issue for us, and I think it's favouring us, which some of the Liberal Party might be, a bit confused about, a bit surprised about. But I think it makes sense when you actually think about it.
All right.
And we've had the same issues in relation to education. If you have just, even if you're in a middle class household with a good income, If you've just been paying private school fees for a very long period of time, if you're in an expensive area for rates, the last thing you want to see is a change to the way that university fees are organised, so that you might be looking at your kids having $100,000 of debt for a university degree. So these issues actually do cut across middle class families. And I think that it's time that somebody was standing up for them, because the Liberals are looking at the top end of town. You know, they're looking at the tax breaks for the big corporations. They're looking at tax breaks for very well-off people. But I want to stand up for middle class families, and that's what I've been doing the entire time that I've been there.
All right, now in these final days, there has been a bit of attention to an issue that you've been a strong advocate on, which is same-sex marriage. Labor's obviously formed a view that Australians can't be trusted to have a respectful national debate on this. Why is that, though? Because isn't the Labor way that all advances, as you would see them, are hard fought and always argued over and eventually won on the strength of those arguments? Why the don't trust the people line right now?
Well, I don't accept that characterisation of it at all. I mean, we've been really clear. We think that the Parliament should do its job and legislate. Is there going to be a plebiscite on whether to go to a 15% GST when the Liberals inevitably have to do that to fund their $50 billion in tax cuts? Is there going to be a plebiscite on the question of $100,000 degrees? Will there be a plebiscite on the $2 billion in cuts to Medicare funding presently in the budget? Absolutely not. So why have a plebiscite on whether we should do our job and legislate to give a minority the same rights as a majority? And this is a fundamental question of decency and justice in our community. After the events of the last few weeks, I've spoken to so many people who are LGBTI themselves, or whose kids are, or siblings, or cousins, or friends, who are so worried about what that plebiscite will mean for Australia. And of course, why shouldn't they be worried? We've all had in our letterboxes this election some unauthorised right-wing material from people who are trying to oppose marriage equality in this country. It's just a taste of what we'll get in the event that there's a plebiscite. But look, we actually believe that what's going to happen is very, very hopefully there will be a Labor government after the 3rd of July. We will legislate for marriage equality within our first 100 days, and marriage equality will be law in this country by October. I mean, that's really what we're talking about here. The choice is, do you want to have marriage equality by October, or do you want to have a national fight about it? All right. It's pretty simple, and that's, I think, why we really clearly oppose the idea of the plebiscite.
Well, let's see what the voters in Griffith have to say about that, and indeed elsewhere around the country. Terri Butler, good luck and thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Greg. Lovely to talk to you.